Hello and welcome to our latest EEA Ask an Expert series here on the EEA Facebook channel. My name is Constant Brand from the EEA Press Office. Today we are talking plastics in Europe's environment. And joining me today are experts Almut Reichel and Lars Mortensen, who should now be appearing on your screens as well. Hi guys, can you hear me?
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes.
Hi,
Good
good afternoon. So plastics is quite a big topic and it's been in the news for quite a few years and an increasingly important environmental issue. The EEA has been doing a lot of work on this issue of late and a lot has been said about the issue as well from the European Union side as well on how big a problem it is and what problems we as consumers, as society face in Europe and around the world and how to deal with the plastic challenge. I guess I'll kick this off, Lars, with a question to you. What is the EEA doing in this area to push ahead the work on reducing plastic waste and addressing plastic issues and how we deal with it in the future?
Thanks, Constant. Well, basically the role of the EEA is to provide information, knowledge and assessments related to plastics in Europe, related to how much is produced, how much is consumed, even how much plastic do we trade, do we export to other countries, and what is the environment and climate impacts of all that. And then we also make some proposals or suggestions for what can be done about that. And this information we use to provide to policymakers and to provide to the public. And this is for the policymakers to make decisions about how can you make plastics more circular and how can you make it more sustainable.
Yes, indeed. And before I should have said that we've recently published 2 briefings, a report and as well another report on biodegradable and compostable plastics, which we'll get into with Almut in a second. But firstly, let me just say to our viewers out there, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section below, right here, and we will make sure that our experts see them and answer them for you. Lars, can you explain a little bit about the recent report that we launched on plastics?
Yes, so we recently launched a report on plastics and Europe's environment and circular economy. And there we looked at exactly that. We looked at the trends in terms of how much plastic do we produce and consume, and what are the environmental impacts of that. In terms of environmental impacts, you have impacts across the value chain. And I believe that Constant has a picture that we show to you.
Yeah,
basically, you all know about the plastics and the problem that it has in terms of plastics in the marine environment, in rivers, in seas, but less people know about plastics also causing greenhouse gas emissions, so contributing to climate change, and air emissions and the problems with chemicals and plastics. And we've looked at the environmental impacts of plastics from the whole value chain, we call it, the whole process of plastics. And maybe I can just say a few words about that. So plastic, actually 99% of plastic is made of oil or gas. That means that to make plastic, you need to extract oil and gas. And there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions from that, air pollution as well, even sometimes oil spill. Also in the production of plastics, the polymers that are plastics, there's a lot of emissions to climate change and to air. In the use phase of plastics, plastic is basically everywhere in our society. We use plastic for clothes and textiles. We use a lot of plastics for packaging. We use plastics in our buildings. We use plastics in electronics and cars. And in that whole phase, there's also environmental impacts. And these include, for example, exposure to chemicals in that phase. And then finally, at the end use of plastics, when plastics become waste, there are environmental impacts of the plastics we see that end up in the oceans and the seas. There's microplastics ending up there. And then there's also greenhouse gas emissions when we handle it, if we landfill or incinerate plastic. So actually the problems related to plastics are bigger and larger and more complex than most people think, I would say.
Sorry, I couldn't share it. This is the wonders of live Facebook. I'll try and share it later if I can. Before I get into 2 related briefings, I don't want to keep Almut in silence too long. So let me just jump to her quickly and then we'll come back to the other 2 related briefings as well. Almut, can you, I believe late last year, we published the biodegradable and compostable plastics briefing, sorry. can you explain a bit about the biodegradable and compostable plastics issue? It's consumers think it could be a way out, possibly of alleviating the stress of plastics on our society.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand the differences between there's biodegradable plastics, there's compostable plastics, and then there's bio-based plastics. And these are very different things. So bio-based plastics, that's plastics that's not made from fossil fuels, but from bio-based feedstock, like starch, for example. And that plastic can be designed that it is biodegradable or not. So if it says bio-based, doesn't say anything about if it's compostable or biodegradable. Then there is the plastics that is designed to be compostable and plastics that's designed to be biodegradable. But you always have to understand that this label compostable or biodegradable means always compostable or biodegradable in a certain environment. So for example, plastics can be designed that it can compost in an industrial, big, well-controlled composting plant. And that does not mean that it also biodegrades, for example, in the open environment or in the sea.
So indeed, that's the confusion, and a lot of consumers may have that, oh, I could just pop this in my compost pile in the backyard.
Exactly, yes. It's very confusing.
Yeah. So the briefing lays out how these different plastic products work.
Exactly. And then, of course, when you think about, well, what can these compostable, biodegradable plastics offer, then there are some uses where this can be like really useful. And one example is the use of biodegradable bags for collecting bio-waste or food waste. Many municipalities, they recommend using those bags because they can go into the composting plant and they can be treated together with the bio-waste. It depends a bit on the technology of the composting plant as well. Not all plants want that, but it depends on the technology. But there's a big discussion about, well, do we really want to make all kinds of packaging biodegradable, compostable? Yeah. Is that really of use? In principle, plastics should be go back into the economy and be used as a material again, and so there should be the focus that materials can have a second, third, fourth life.
It's a very complex field, the whole field of plastics, I must admit. Well, we're going to ping pong back a little bit here because these are quite separate but important issues. But I also want to touch on the other two. Getting questions already. In the other two briefings that were launched on the same day, which touched on more circular economy aspects and also on textiles.
Yes, so basically we launched a briefing on plastic and textiles. And the reason we did with that was because textiles, so that is mainly clothing, is 60% to 70% of that is actually made of plastic. So it's a big issue related to plastics. And we looked at what are the environmental impacts. And many of the environmental impacts are the same as those with plastics, the greenhouse gas emissions, the microplastics, etc. And so we wanted to point to that issue because the European Commission is now developing a textile strategy with new policies to textiles. So we wanted to point to the issue that plastic and textiles, synthetic textiles, is actually a big issue to address as well. And then if you allow me to, on the other briefing, we point to we make actually a framework for circular business models because we know and we show that circular business models is a big part of the solution to this. Of course, you need consumers to change, you need policymakers, but mainly you need business to move from what they've done for so many years to produce something for consumption, and then it throws out to a more circular way of producing things. So when we use plastics, we should use it, of good quality. We should use it again and again. We should recycle, remanufacture, and reuse. And there's a lot of business in doing that, actually. There's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of potential for the business in doing that. So we show how business can do that and how actually policies and consumption behavior can enable that.
Okay, great, thanks. We will put the links of the briefings and the report down below in the comment section so you can look at them more closely. Let me try one more time to see if I can share this thing before we get to the questions. Can you see that?
Yeah, so maybe I should just shall I repeat what I said on this one, Constant?
I'll just go quickly through the extraction production, and maybe some viewers may not know the role of the oil and gas industry and sector in the production.
Exactly. So what I said is basically that 99% of plastic is actually made of oil and gas, and this is why we illustrate here the extraction phase. So when you look at plastics and its environmental impacts, you have to look at it through the whole life cycle. So the extraction is a big part of that. So is the production, the use, and the after use. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, you have a lot of use of oil and gas, greenhouse gas emissions from extraction. You have greenhouse gas emissions from production. You have use of the oil and gas. In the use phase, we use plastic for the electronics, the textiles, vehicles, packaging, buildings. There's exposure to toxic substances. And then the after use is probably what most people know about, plastic ending up on the land, in our oceans, and in our seas and freshwater. And then there's also greenhouse gas emissions. So this is like the picture of the overall environment and climate impacts from plastics in Europe.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's take some questions. We got some here from Islif Kennedy. Which category of plastic usage, building, clothing, packaging, would be the easiest to replace with a different material? And similar question from Matt Fox, are we globally close to any alternative for plastics?
Well, I would say out of these big uses of plastics, I would say that packaging is probably an area where you can replace a lot of the plastic packaging by other packaging like cardboard, for example, which is natural based and which has generally less impact. So I would say packaging is probably the one that you can. For textiles, it's more complicated because synthetic textiles made of plastics have environmental impact, but the natural fibers also have impacts. There are other impacts. So it's not so easy actually. Maybe it's more about only using plastic when plastic is needed and when it's the best material, and otherwise perhaps use less plastics. That's the case in packaging where you could use less.
And in what sense, how easy is it to recycle or reuse these plastics in clothing or packaging to take them from the other elements that they're bound to? Is that a difficult process, or? It's
a very difficult process. Plastic is one word, but plastic is many different types of materials. And for the plastic in clothing, it's very, very difficult to recycle it. For the plastic, the PET, for example, in bottles, it's much easier. You can recycle. So it depends on what it's actually used for. But in general, it's hard to recycle plastics.
Okay, thanks. Almut, do you want to add anything?
Maybe I can come in here. And well, the issue with plastics is that it's such a huge variety, and it's a lot of different polymers, but also a lot of different additives that are used. And the more complex a plastic product is, the more difficult it is to recycle it. For example, if you have more or less clean PET plastic bottles, which are all colorless, then recycling is actually possible, and it's also economically viable and done. But the main problem are the mixed plastics with lots of different kinds of types and different layers of plastics in the same product and so on.
Okay. Again, to our viewers, if you have any comments or questions, please jot them down and we'll get them to our experts right away. A follow-up question, I guess a relevant, very important question. What's the EU doing on this? Well, how are reports being used, and what's the EU done so far?
Well, our reports are being used quite extensively, I would say, and plastic has been on the table for quite a number of years in the EU. So we have an EU plastic strategy, which lots of ways to deal with it, and we also have a directive, a legal obligation to reduce single-use plastics. So EU is doing quite a lot, and very recently, EU has been pushing for moving towards a global agreement on plastic, because plastic is not only a European problem, and there's now a process going on with developing a global agreement on plastic, which is really nice news.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe to complement that, on the waste side, we have had targets for plastics recycling, for packaging, for quite a number of years now. And these targets have just been sharpened. So there's new targets for to be met by 2025 and 2030. There is things are happening, and also the way the countries in Europe have to report on the recycling has also changed, meaning that the targets are more ambitious than the previous ones.
So these are recycling rates to recycle.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
It's been in news a lot, of course, and also with the COVID pandemic, a lot more use of single-use plastics, we understand. I know, Lars, you're working on that in the months and the weeks ahead. But I understand also that the plastic recycling market has collapsed of sorts. Can anybody touch on that? And what will this mean for EU policies going forward?
Well, exactly. The plastic is complex as it is, but now with COVID-19, it has become just even more complex and complicated. Basically, what we see in terms of COVID-19 and plastic is, of course, that we see face masks and gloves in the environment, and we have to deal with that in very huge numbers. Also, what we've seen is that we've seen a very rapid increase in online sales. And when we have online sales, we have a lot of packaging. Much of that is made of plastic, so that is increasing. And then at the same time, there's changes in a way that, we're not allowed to go to restaurants, so we have a lot of takeaway. So that increases certain part of takeaway packaging as well. So that really increases the amount of plastic and changes what is in there. And then the last thing about that is what you mentioned in terms of the recycling market. With the COVID-19 has come an economic downturn. With an economic downturn has come decreased oil prices. So oil has become cheaper, which makes it cheaper to make new plastics, which means that recycled plastics has become too expensive now. So that is really a problem that we have to address, and hopefully, that will, when the economy starts growing again, that will solve itself to some extent, but it's quite a significant problem to address.
Indeed. I just have a question here from Eleni Kakuri. Maybe we should not forget the risk due to microplastics and nanoplastics. Who would like to comment to them? That's some important subject as well. Maybe I can start, and Almut can supplement. I fully agree. The whole issue with plastics in the environment is that it degrades and it becomes microplastics. So we see huge amounts of microplastics on land, in the oceans, in the seas, but also in air now, actually. And this is gradually becoming smaller and smaller pieces because it does not degrade. So it also becomes nanoparticles, and those particles are basically everywhere, and we have very little knowledge about that. And of course, as an agency, we try together with others to provide more knowledge about that. Almut, did you want to? Yeah, I could maybe add that we are also working on, together with our colleagues from the Marine Environment Department, that we are trying to estimate how much of plastics waste is escaping and going into the European seas. But it's very difficult because you can imagine how difficult it is to estimate how much plastics is blown away from landfills. It's really we know very little, and which doesn't mean that we can't act on that problem. But indeed. Yeah. If I can just add to that, Constance, so our colleagues have actually developed an app called Marine Litter Watch, where people can go in and report the plastic and other waste they found on the beaches, and that is really, really important information for us because we use that information to assess how much plastic is out there. So that's something. And this data, and thanks for reminding me. And this data is collected by groups, by volunteers that go on beaches across Europe. Exactly. Yeah, and perhaps we could put the link down there as well because it's quite a cool data that I think so. Gathered from that.
our colleagues have just added to this that a category of face masks and gloves, so we can start seeing how much actually ends up there, because at the moment we don't know so much about that.
No, but we are seeing them when we're walking around.
Exactly,
we do see
yeah.
face masks, and we have to pick them up, and yeah, it's a bit sad. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please do get them into us, and let me whirl through some more questions for our experts. From Stefan, does the EEA only provide information and help for EU member states, or is it provided for other European countries in the Western Balkans, for instance?
I can say something on that. We have a long-standing cooperation with the Western Balkan countries. For example, we have currently a project with the Western Balkan countries to look into their waste management, and it's not focused on plastics, but of course plastics is part of the whole waste management there. So and we will publish an assessment early next year about that. But maybe Constant, it's also important to say that our members are not only the EU countries, but we have 5 more members of the EEA, and we work very closely with them.
And we cooperate with the 6 Western Balkan countries, my colleagues tell me. Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, as well as Kosovo.
Yes.
So indeed, we work on these issues with these countries. Comment from Albina, the reason that I'm following this event is the problem of plastic waste, most non-biodegradable ones. So we need to make policy about this. Just to touch on this, what exactly is the EU doing on biodegradable waste?
Within the Circular Economy Action Plan and also the plastic strategy, there is some activities where the Commission has committed to develop a legislative framework for biodegradable and compostable plastics. And that is, for example, to get better labeling, more clear, more reliable labeling out there, and also to identify which kind of products, which kind of applications are suitable for using compostable or biodegradable plastics, and which not. So where do this kind of plastics actually bring an environmental benefit? And that is currently, well, we know that there are studies ongoing, and the Commission has started working on that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Another issue that's pretty big is the export of garbage, trash, waste, plastic waste. Yes. We've all seen the pictures in the Pacific of plastic, which they've sourced back to Europe, for instance. A question from Todd on this issue. Europe has been exporting some plastic waste to countries like China and now to some others. Shouldn't Europe tackle its own waste problem at home? Lars or Almut?
I think the answer is yes. I think we did export a lot of plastic waste some years ago. Then China put a ban on that, and we exported less. But now there is actually global agreement on reducing and limiting these. So very soon we will not export plastic waste anymore, and I think that is good for several reasons, because we should deal with our own plastic waste, but we're also better at dealing with it than those countries we would export it to. So I think it makes good sense, and it's a challenge for Europe, but it's also something I think a challenge we can handle better than some of these other countries.
Yeah, I can also complement what Lars has said. As late as in December, the EU has adopted a new set of rules on the export of plastic waste. So plastic waste that is hazardous or plastic waste that is difficult to recycle is not allowed anymore to be exported to countries that are not member of the OECD. And there's also not exactly the same, but a set of rules for exports of plastic waste from one country, EU country to the other, so that a country that considers that they don't want to import that kind of waste, they don't have to give their consent for that. So there has been I think that discussion has actually had an effect in terms of new regulation.
Good. I have another question from Enslin, back to recycling. It's good that there are plans to improve and increase plastic recycling, but shouldn't the emphasis be on stopping big business from using so much plastic? Good question.
Yeah, I think I can take that one. Yes, we indeed need to curb the trend of rising plastic waste amounts. If we look for plastic packaging waste, it has grown with 20% just within a decade, and that's not sustainable. And for many plastic products, there are alternatives to single use, for example. There are reusable alternatives, but they are not always like on offer, or they are more expensive. So I think one reason why we see this development is also that, well, there have been targets for recycling of plastic waste for a while, but there are no targets for reducing the amount of plastic waste or any waste actually. But at least there is now an aim to develop such targets. It will still take a few years, but I think we are hopeful that they will emerge at some point. Yeah, I think the other thing what Lars has mentioned is the Single-Use Plastics Directive that aims to curb especially single-use plastics. Next to that, the directive forbids some plastic products. It also puts some commitments to European member state to reduce the amount of plastic used, single-use plastic.
Okay, that's a good segue into some questions on circular economy, because that is part of the answer Europe has come up with to address this problem, obviously. And I have a question here from Duarte. In order for a circular economy transition for plastics industry, what are some of the crucial indicators companies must control?
I'm not sure what exactly is meant by indicators to control, but in terms of, you know, having a circular economy for plastics, it's very much about, you know, making plastics that are, you know, that are simple in a way that you can actually, you can reuse it and you can recycle in a good way, but also considering, you know, make plastic when plastic is the best material for use plastic. But if plastic is not the best material for that purpose, then use something else, I would say.
Okay, and we've got some other questions here. Back to bioplastics and bio bags from Gaia. The question, in the case of biodegradable or compostable plastic bags, how do we know what to do with them?
It's a very good question, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it depends a bit on the waste management infrastructure, which in your municipality, if there is a industrial composting plant that is happy to take that kind of plastic or biodegradable plastic bags, then it's safe to put it into the bio-waste bin. But if that's not the case, then you might have to look very closely at the label, what's that is on the bag. If it says it's only for industrial composting, then you shouldn't try to compost it in your own compost bin, because you can't control the conditions in a small compost bin as the big industrial composting plants can. So it's a tricky question.
Yeah, and I guess before I'm getting loads of questions. Right now, is it incinerated? What's going on with it right now?
Sorry, you were breaking up, Constant. We didn't hear your question.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you repeat the question,
Hello?
please?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I think the big question these days is, because the market for recycling is so low, what's happening to the plastic waste right now? Is it being incinerated or put in landfill sites?
Yeah, I think it depends on, again, on the municipality and on the waste infrastructure. Most of the plastic that is not collected separately for recycling is collected together with the rest of the waste. And then if the municipality or the country you live in sends this mixed waste to incineration, then the plastic gets incinerated. And if the country mainly relies on landfilling, then it goes to landfill. But even the plastic that is collected for recycling, it's not 100% recycled because it contains a lot of types of plastics that are not recyclable, and those are sorted out in the sorting process, and they usually also go into incineration.
Okay, I know time is running short, so I'm just going to group some questions together so we get in many as we can. From Eleni, so you might want to jot these down, guys, just in case.
Okay.
Is the situation in the Mediterranean Sea worse than in other European seas? And another question from Billy Dolan. What is the role of accreditation systems in helping confidence in data management? Is there or will there be an ISO or EN standard in this regard? And also from Billy, what is the statistical confidence in plastic packaging tonnage reported by member states? Why has Ireland, an island off mainland Europe, have one of the highest consumption of plastic packaging per capita? I don't know if we can address the member state specific issues. From Loop Mira, we know that around 5% of plastics are adjuvants and many of them represents a risk for our health. Is EEA monitoring these substances in the environment? Is there some program in place that study their elimination in water or soil during degradation of plastics? And are there some actions to replace or eliminate these risky substances in plastics at EU level? I know we've touched on some of these issues. So I'll leave you guys with these to answer. We try and keep your answers short. We are running out of time.
You want to start, Almut, or shall I?
I can start maybe quickly with the statistics on plastic packaging. We know that the statistics on plastics packaging is a bit shaky. There are a lot of different reasons, but the amounts that are reported as being put on the market and generated can be influenced by incentives for underreporting, for example. However, this will change because the new rules that the countries will have to follow for reporting will change, and they have been changed, and they will there will be more reliability of that data coming in the future, coming from 2022.
Okay.
And if I can, I can add right now, I think on the first questions about Mediterranean, the Mediterranean is a problem where we see a lot of plastics. There's no doubt. Our Marine Litter Watch app covers that. And yes, you know, it's a huge area. There's not a lot of water. You know, it's not an ocean, so it's kind of like locked in. That means that most of the plastic end up on our beaches actually. So it is a huge problem. Then in terms of the question about monitoring substances, chemicals, yes, we have a huge work program in the EEA on health and chemicals, which does try to cover a lot of these issues. So this is something we look at the best we can.
Okay, and I know we have to wrap up soon. So one last question from Marina. Whether are you conducting research on microplastics in rivers?
We are not we're not conducting ourselves research on that, but what we are doing is that we are engaging on studies on microplastics. For example, now we're looking into how much of the microplastics is from textiles. So we're trying to make an adjustment of that. And then we're working together with other organizations and countries on other parts of the microplastics. So we're working very hard to basically map the microplastics, and then we use information from researchers who really dig into the specific rivers, etc., because that's outside our scope, which is very detailed. We look at the European level.
Okay, it's almost time to wrap up, so I'll give you guys the final word, and perhaps you could look a bit ahead at what the EEA is going to work on in the months ahead, so our viewers can know what's coming down the pipeline.
Thanks a lot. If I can start, I think, thanks a lot for this. I think this what we've said today really shows that plastic is an unsustainable system of production and consumption, and that there's a lot that the business can do. They can really make business models which are much more circular on plastics. There's a lot of policymakers can do to constantly improve the legislation, the information. But there's also a lot of things you can do as an individual. Use less plastics, use less single-use plastics, but also participate in local cleanup efforts. There's a lot of that all over. So I'd like to encourage everybody to do that. And in terms of next projects, we have a report coming out on impacts of plastics on COVID-19. So some of what I said here, we have all the details about that. We have a report coming out on climate change and plastics in detail. We have work coming on waste and plastics, and then microplastics from textiles. So this is an important area for us. So we continue providing assessments and briefings that we come up with. So watch this space.
Yeah. Almut?
Yeah, I can just add that on the waste side, we have a mandate to follow closely and to assess what the countries actually are doing on the waste targets, including the plastic packaging waste recycling target. So we will work with the member states to look at what they are doing and that they actually meet those targets.
Great. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much to the experts and to the viewers for joining us today. And again, the links to the reports and briefings are below, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.